I would now like to introduce today's moderators and presenters. H. Karthik, partner, leads Everest Group's global sourcing practice and has significant experience in helping organizations on global business services, GBS strategy, evolution, and portfolio optimization. Parul Jin, practice director, front ends the firm's thought leadership on next generation themes for GBS organizations such as innovation and impacts of digitalization and automation on delivery portfolio strategies. Rohit Agarwal, practice director, leads engagements and initiatives focused on workforce strategy and GBS growth and evolution, including managing our GBS Enterprise membership program. And with that, I'll turn things over to Karthik. Take it away, Karthik.
Hey, thanks, Clara. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining from. If you could just move to the next slide, just setting the context for today's webinar. We have been doing a lot of work around innovation in global business services. And the objective of today is to really talk about three things. What drives successful innovation in global business services? What have the best-in-class global business services organizations achieved in terms of innovation? And the third is what's been their journey, what have been some learnings and best practices. Just a quick definitional point. When we say global business services, those are called by different terms in different companies and markets. Some call them global in-house centers, GCCs, global capability centers is terminology used in India. Some call them, shared services, etc. So we're just using the word global business services that essentially refer to in-house, groups, in-house organizational groups based in multiple global delivery locations. The second thing I would say is a large part of our webinar today is based on a specific Pinnacle Model assessment that we had done, which is a targeted deep dive assessment using a survey plus interview methodology on leading global business services centers. Right? To just move on, and you may be wondering, okay, why are we talking about GBS in the context of COVID? Now, there are two reasons for this. One, I think it is time to talk about things other than COVID. Also, we believe that the existing situation and the recession is actually going to strengthen the GBS value proposition even further. So what do I mean by that? So GBS have had a history of differentiation levers for the parent enterprise, things around driving customer experience, having a consolidated view across different technologies, products, services, enabling transformation and change through high skill capabilities. And if ever there was an opportune time for GBS organizations to step up overall, and particularly on innovation, the time is now. Right? And as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. And this is the opportune time for GBS organization to accelerate their innovation journeys to help enterprises navigate the economic crisis. Now, the concept of innovation in GBS is not new. All we're saying is that it takes on an additional emphasis and an opportunity in the context of the ongoing recession. Right, with that, let's move on and let me set some context to what do we mean by innovation? It means different things to different companies. Essentially, we're saying innovation has to be something that has a fresh idea. It has to address a real challenge or a business need for the enterprise. So it's not innovation for the sake of it, but tied to a clear business need. It has to help improve customer experience, be it the internal customer, which the GBS organizations serve typically, or the end customer, which the enterprise is serving. And the idea is to be, translatable into something feasible. We're going to use three types of innovation for the purposes of today's discussion. One is to do with innovation around products and services, so helping the parent company introduce new products, right? It could mean technology products as well, or new forms of delivering services. The second is perhaps the most established form of innovation, which is around process innovation. So we're not talking about incremental productivity gains, but anything that's done on process transformation to drive, efficiency, to drive meaningful efficiency in processes. And the third is innovation that can drive, the organizations or the broader enterprise expand their reach with customers or drive a completely different operating model or a business model. So these are three types of innovation we're going to talk about today. And then in terms of the extent of innovation, it could mean incremental innovation, or something which is more transformational, which helps the parent company create a new business or to serve new customer segments. Uh, with that, let me move on and talk about what the Pinnacle model is about. Right? And some of you may have participated in our previous Pinnacle model assessments or have listened to webinars. So the Pinnacle model essentially looks at two things. One, what outcomes did GBS generate for their parent organization? So what is the tangible impact to the parent organization using innovation? And it also looks at what are the underlying capabilities that helped GBS organizations achieve these outcomes. Now, we go through a rigorous process, that includes surveys, interviews, forming hypotheses, and all this is also embellished by our own research and advisory work in helping GBS accelerate innovation. With that, let me move on to really the summary of the assessment, right? So this is our typical Pinnacle model plot. For the study, we had about 51 GBS organizations that are representative of different industry verticals, representative of multiple GBS geographies. As you would expect, the largest representation was from India because it is the largest GBS geography, but it included representation across different other geographies as well. What do we see here is actually 51 GBS organizations plotted around, as I said, the outcomes achieved, which we have categorized into three parts: cost impact, operational impact, and strategic impact of innovation. And then on the x-axis, you've got a classification according to their capabilities, right? Which includes what is their vision and strategy, what's their operating model, talent capability, technology capability, and how do they collaborate with the ecosystem. So, we've identified 5 out of these 51 as Pinnacle organizations. What we're going to talk to you today is about, based on this study as well, and our broader experience in innovation, what really differentiates the Pinnacle organizations when it comes to innovation from the rest? What impacts have they achieved substantially different from the others, and what have they done differently, which is hopefully good learning for the audience as they reflect on their own innovation journeys. If you could move to the next slide. We have a poll question to kick this off, right? Which of the following statements best describes your GBS role in the enterprise innovation strategy, right? Ranging from you have a limited or a no role, or you're seen, or the GBS is seen as a nerve center driving innovation across multiple areas. So this is a poll question which will be open for a few seconds. So requesting the audience to participate in this. Just to be clear, this is in the context of the GBS role in the enterprise innovation strategy. So GBS, as we are defining it, is in-house or employee-based groups that are working in several global delivery locations. Could be India, Philippines, Central Eastern Europe, Latin America, pretty much anywhere in the world. Okay, guess the poll will close in a few seconds. Okay, interesting. Rohit, what do you think about these results? Are you surprised with these poll results?
Not at all, Karthik. In fact, what is really interesting is to see that in the last 2 years, most of the GBS have been in the middle two segments, and that's a high concentration is. But there has been a continuous movement from second category to the third category. What's really interesting is also 10% in the last category, and we are seeing this evolve fast. In fact, we have seen examples of some of the insurance or technology companies where there has been a top-down mandate to use the GBS as the innovation COEs. So really interesting to see that share also increasing over time.
Okay. Yeah, this was a pretty much mirror, my own assessment as well based on our take of the market. Okay. With that, let's move back into the webinar, right? Just if you could just move on to the next slide. To anchor the discussion today, we've got a set of what we call as convictions, provocations, and controversies. If you could move to the next slide. So convictions are our foundational beliefs around GBS and innovation. Provocations are value creation ideas for GBS organizations and for enterprises in leveraging the GBS when it comes to innovation. And then, there are a bunch of unknowns, which we're calling as controversies. Just moving on to set the stage in terms of the 5 convictions we want to talk about today. The first is most GBS organizations deliver significant cost and operational impact due to innovation. What this means is innovation has helped strengthen the parent organization's cost and operational performance. A few of them are also delivering strategic impact, which is the Pinnacle organizations. We'll talk about that as we move along. The second is we look at what really enables innovation. A robust talent strategy is absolutely essential. So it's just not about technology, or process knowledge. It's really about robust talent strategy. And then the third point here is it's not just about, if you think about talent, it's just not about the in-house talent, but the ability to capitalize on ecosystem partnerships, be it universities, startups, even third-party service providers. It is important for GBS organizations to leverage the ecosystem strategically to capitalize on the opportunity. Now, what helps accelerate innovation journeys, and just goes back to the poll question, is that if there is a dedicated innovation team in GBS that has a reasonable amount of ownership and a proactive role, that really helps accelerate innovation journeys. And the fifth conviction we want to talk about is it is important to have measurable outcomes to track the GBS progress when it comes to innovation. With that, Parul, do you want to talk about some of these convictions as we move along?
Sure, Karthik. Talking about the first one, right? What we have here is good news and great news. Most organizations have been able to achieve, on an average, 17% return on investment and about 11 odd percent of improvement across cost and operational areas from their innovation initiatives, which is quite meaningful. However, the great news here is that Pinnacle GBS organizations have been able to outperform their peers and achieve 1.5 to 2x higher impact. Now, there's significant improvement in other operational parameters, in particular SLA compliance and staff productivity, where we see the gap between majority of other organizations and Pinnacle GBS is quite significant. Just to give an example here, we've seen a leading financial services organization have their GBS deploy a paperless digitized platform to capture information from end customer, thereby kind of shortening the overall client onboarding blackout period from 10 days to 5 days. We've got other examples of banking firms where they've employed mobile only banks, kind of leading to reduction of about 50 odd percent in cost of customer acquisition, overall 70% reduction in cost of services delivery. So many good stories here. Among all of these areas, we believe cost savings are even more opportune right now, given the heightened emphasis on cost takeout, optimization in the current scenario. Now, while we have looked at, compared the outcome, now let's take a look at the differentiated capabilities which are enabling these organizations to drive such impact. The first one, or rather the most essential one, is building the right talent and culture. Now, almost all organizations have made tweaks to their talent models. However, leading innovators have undertaken significant remodeling of their existing talent practices. Pinnacle GBS organizations have recognized that step changes are required across all of their talent model components to create a fertile, innovation-enabling ecosystem. One of the principal tenets we believe of driving success here, specifically with regard to innovation, is developing culture. Dedicated investments in developing a customer-centric culture with an active CXO level participation kind of forms the key. We are seeing firms deploying multiple tools to re-engineer their DNA and develop a culture that breeds innovation. So popular examples include incentivizing innovation, providing special recognition for out-of-the-box thinking, kind of enforcing or bringing in more positive reinforcement, gamification of programs, stimulation of experimentation mindset, etc. We've also observed GBS organizations effectively leveraging different levers for attracting and retaining talent. Further, we are seeing strong innovators recalibrating their existing performance measurement metrics to align with the impact generated against business objectives. Rohit, you've been interacting with GBS leaders day in and day out. Can you share a few examples to amplify on this?
Yeah, and Parul, some very interesting points you mentioned, right? So both around building the culture and building the talent and also retaining. So one very good example I want to share is that the core aspect of building entrepreneurship is very important, because innovation cannot be, you can't coach your talent to kind of continuously innovate initiative by initiative. You have to make it more of a inbuilt, attribute of the way they operate. So one of the great example is in banking. Many examples, but one I want to share is where a bank hires certain employees, and these employees are made responsible for new innovation in their respective areas, and then they're given longer timelines. For example, 3 months to come up with some new solution on blockchain. And if they come up with something, they're also given a platform to take it forward, share it with global leaders, take it into execution mode. So it's more like a small project that they run end to end on top of what they are doing. We have seen this promotion of entrepreneurial talent, a big example. One very timely example I want to share is that while many organizations have built ecosystem and actually a lot of physical ecosystem to bring employees together and encourage them to share ideas, exchange ideas, and work on new ideas in the office space in the last 2 to 3 months, that has definitely taken a backseat. One technology company leader I was just talking to last week, and they are having a dedicated focus to continue some of these runs every Friday, and they are managing to bring teams together virtually or leverage their portals to make sure that they are still crowdsourcing ideas. They are thinking about innovation in this time as well, because this is the time to step up rather than take the foot off the pedal. And they are able to come up with a lot of solutions by crowdsourcing. So definitely these couple of examples. In fact, let me move on and talk a bit about how GBS are not just limiting to employees within the organization, but actually leveraging the external ecosystem to drive really transformational innovation, and not just limiting themselves to incremental innovation. What we looked at as part of this recent research is among the 4 different types of ecosystem partners, ranging from academic institutes to service providers, startup community, and specifically technology vendors. What's the difference between how some of the organizations that are pinnacle performers partner with the ecosystem versus others? Very interesting to note that almost 85 to 90% of the firms that participated are partnering with external ecosystem in some capacity. But it's not just that you partner, but also how and with whom. That creates a major difference. If you look at the numbers, you will see that the numbers in green are almost 100% everywhere, whereas we have a variation in the blue ones that clearly shows that Pinnacle GBS have been more structural and have been more disciplined in exploring different avenues of partnership, but more importantly, where they have done it. For example, they are engaging with academic institutions to drive new idea generation, concept testing. We have seen example of an insurance company that by design puts some of the very high skilled resources hired from colleges, on some niche courses into innovation related initiatives during their internship programs, during their training programs, and through that they are able to improve their overall talent proposition, but also infuse that new talent right from day one into innovation. Even in terms of leveraging the startup community, we have seen Pinnacle organizations really being more aggressive and more open. In fact, we have seen a lot of GBS organizations helping out the parent find the right partner and kind of work with them again on different areas of not just testing new ideas, but also taking some of those solutions to market. So they have figured out what should be a partnership model, maybe a revenue generation model. At what point do we acquire that product? In the recent time, I'm also hearing a lot about GBS looking out in the startup community and thinking, is this crisis providing us some opportunity to partner, and not just partner, but also acquire some of these startups to maybe hire, acquire that technology or acquire that talent. So we were talking about talent before, but hiring talent through acquisition of startups is also becoming more popular. We are seeing a lot of examples in the Bay Area, but even in Asia, some of this pickup. One thing I just wanted to reiterate is that we've been using the term Pinnacle GBS. Think about them as best-in-class GICs. This is Everest Group way of defining them. And when we assess a large set of companies on a typical theme for this study, their innovation journey, we differentiate those who have invested most in their capabilities and achieved great outcomes, as Karthik presented on the 2x2 matrix earlier. And then those who have really, emerged in the top right corner of that chart, we label them Pinnacle GBS versus the other. And you can think about them as best-in-class GBS, really. Parul, you have also been talking about, how do organizations really structure these teams and build these teams internally to kind of, accelerate the innovation. Do you want to share a bit about that?
Sure. So what we're seeing here is uh, essentially involving the right people in the right team structure is another critical component to ensuring success. So Pinnacle GBS organizations or best-in-class organizations have realized that a formal, a dedicated innovation team rather than an ad hoc approach kind of helps to provide more structure, ensures that innovative ideas don't get stuck in the pipeline, and then kind of helps in more agility overall. Now, while we've seen varied designs for innovation teams based on organizational fit, business alignment, one common thread that we've picked up is a focused, top-driven approach to creating structural changes supplemented by the support from middle management to ensure smooth implementation. We've seen leading innovators involve stakeholders from different parts of the organization, such as functional and business teams, central innovation groups, R&D departments, shared services teams, GBS teams, to invest time in exploring adjacent and transformational opportunities. Now, engaging people from different parts of the organization helps in cross-pollination, enables accelerated development of a more holistic or a best-in-class solution. Uh, With that, we also, in addition to the team structure, right, we now move on to the fifth conviction, which is around the usage of metrics to kind of track the success of innovation. Now, measuring the success of innovation is a difficult, but we believe a critical enabler to kind of gauge how well are we progressing on the track. Now, strong governance mechanisms help GBSs address, we'd say, three key objectives. First, assessing the effectiveness of innovation activities. Second, guiding allocation for resources, like it may be people, technology, funds, so on and so forth. And thirdly, assigning accountability for actions and responsibilities. Successful innovators have kind of introduced strong governance mechanisms, institutionalized the measurement of success. We've seen a variation or a plethora of metrics being adopted, right, from idea-based metrics, financial metrics, operational metrics, concept-based metrics to measure the overall effectiveness. However, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and GBS organizations should carefully evaluate the strategic rationale and feasibility for defining and implementing these KPIs. Now, one essential point which we've observed in GBS organizations is that only defining and implementing KPIs might not help you walk the entire mile, but however, aligning leadership around the criticality of that innovation governance is essential to ensure that they're successfully implemented and outcomes are achieved. Measuring innovation, we'd say, is a continuous process, right? So GBS organizations need to reassess the relevance of these metrics as their own business overall innovation management processes involve. With that, we now move on to our next poll question. Thanks. So this is a question around, how do you see your GBS's innovation budget to change in the current or in the post-COVID scenario over the pre-COVID scenario? So are we expecting it to change significantly, decrease, increase? The question is open for voting now. Would request all the attendees to share their responses. Keeping the poll open for another 5 seconds. And we have the results here. Rohit, how do you expect the results? Is that surprising? Any reactions?
Yeah, and Parul, this was one of the questions I was most looking forward to. I think it's a bit of a scramble right now, on in terms of decision making or expectations. I would rather say too many uncertainties out there. So this looks about fine. What I've heard typically, this to mean is that a lot of transformation initiatives and innovation related to cost takeout initiatives will get more backing because organizations will need to get back on the growth curve, will need to accelerate revenues, and of course manage costs better. So some of those initiatives, they're expecting increase in budgets, but at the same time, a lot of discretionary, spend and a lot of other aspirational initiatives may actually see a bit of a slowdown. So I think GBS will also need to play it very smartly and then really prioritize areas where they want to invest because there will be a more stringent focus on where they can actually invest additional dollars versus not.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that I would actually expect and want that GBS is focused more on innovation in the scenario. Maybe that's a good segue, right, to get into the provocations. If you were to move to the next slide. Yeah, before that, we have a complimentary executive briefing for enterprise GBS stakeholders to compare their innovation maturity with best-in-class peers. And to do that, all you need to do is to take our 5-minute executive survey, which will be on the link in the chat window, towards the end of the webinar. And in return for your participation, we will share with you a complimentary executive briefing with a high-level comparison of your organization's innovation maturity compared to peers. Okay, moving on to the next section of our webinar on the provocations. The first is, and this is particularly relevant in the context of the recession. Enterprises should leverage GBS organization beyond process innovation. If you were to move on, just building on this Pinnacle research, if you look at the Pinnacle organization, and just to recap, the Pinnacle GBS organizations are those that have achieved significant strategic impact from innovation and are also best in class from a capability standpoint. They've done phenomenally well in product and service innovation and business model innovation. So specifically, what we mean by product service innovation is helping the parent company with either new technology products, new types of delivering service to customers, and in helping the parent enterprise drive new business model innovation. Parul, can you just talk about one example on this?
Sure, Karthik. So we've seen the GIC develop smart contracts between oil corporations and banks using blockchain technology. Now the innovation team in the GBS, they developed a POC, or which kind of helped in order to enable faster integration. Now the GBS team, interesting point here, was responsible for managing the project end to end. The team had in-house blockchain experts, it collaborated with the IT operations team and served the partner entity for which the POC was being created.
Yeah, thanks, Parul. If you were to move on to our next provocation, and this our provocation is really to the enterprises, also called as the parent organizations leveraging GBS. That you may be actually underplaying the GBS model or under leveraging the GBS model to deliver strategic impact to the enterprise. What does that really mean? If you were to move on, clearly, if you were to look at the Pinnacle GBS organizations, they're delivering substantially more strategic impact. So what does that strategic impact mean? So improving end customer experience for the parent organization, accelerating speed to market for products and services, right? Increase in the number of new products or service offerings, improvement in customer retention. You'll see a host of ways in which the GBS innovation is delivering strategic impact. And that's really what Pinnacle GBS organizations are doing very differently and more effectively from the rest of the organization. So just to take an example, one of the financial services firms, their GBS organizations enabled that company to effectively tap into the Africa market, right, by designing new e-payments or mobile solutions, right? Because there was a challenge which with the digital adoption in the African markets that the company wanted to enter. So the GBS organization, which is based in very different parts of the world, actually helped the parent enterprise develop new solutions from a digital perspective to tap into that market. Now that clearly is an example of strategic impact which Pinnacle GBS organizations are leveraging. Okay. Moving on to provocation 3, Parul, do you want to talk about this?
Sure, Karthik. This is particularly interesting where we essentially look at, of all the technologies that are being used to kind of drive innovation, what is the most effective sourcing model for those? So we've seen, we kind of asked respondents around, whether they're kind of using their in-house teams more or they're partnering or liaising with, collaborating with ecosystem partners. And interestingly, majority of the technologies, be it mobile, RPA, cloud, cybersecurity, the level of satisfaction, the achievement rates, success rates have been way more effective when the technologies were kind of developed in-house, used in-house. More or less, we've seen GBS organizations taking a two-pronged approach. In the short run, kind of catalyze on the innovation journey, by leaving or co-creating tech solutions in collaboration with the external partners. However, in the long run, as the in-house technology team matures, we're seeing GBS organizations insourcing those technology solutions to reduce dependence, avoid kind of security related issues, and then have an end-to-end kind of a view for all those technologies. To take an example, a leading financial institution, the GBS of this institution developed the next gen technology research lab, wherein employees could download, perform experimentation on niche technologies such as uh, blockchain, IoT, and so etc. Now, if the POC of that particular product was successful, the project would be presented to the leadership team for further approval. So they've kind of creating these not only labs to experiment, but also developing these products which are helping them get faster POC time, shorter time to market as well. Karthik, it does seem surprising that in-house development of technology such as even RPA has been more effective. Why do you think that is the case?
It's just interesting, Parul. I think we've got to view this from the lens of innovation, right? So this is not about RPA for RPA's sake, or data analytics for just delivering data analytics, but how do you leverage that in an innovation context? And just to take the example of one leading retailer that has a substantial large GBS, what they found was that the pre-existing sort of available tools in terms of RPA did not really fit their custom business environment, right? And if they had to actually leverage the combined power of all these technology solutions, right? So you look at mobile combined with RPA combined with data analytics in their specific business context, they found it more effective to develop their own solution. Now, this is not to say that is a recommended model for every company, but when it comes to innovation using these technologies, it has been proven that some form of in-house development can be more effective than just trying to customize existing tools available in the market. Right. Okay. With that, Parul, we've talked about convictions and provocations. What are some controversies that you see on this?
So essentially, we have three controversies right now, right? These are the themes that we will be investigating more, themes that we do not have definite answers to yet, but are or of sure interest right now. The first one is whether we believe the current corona crisis-led economic recession will amplify the case for offshoring, nearshoring, some of the strategic or transformational innovation initiatives, essentially the low-cost innovation, or would we see the protectionist regime kind of swinging the pendulum in another direction? The second one is, do we expect enterprises to invest more in innovation to achieve efficiency gains, effectiveness gains, despite at a time when radical and rapid cost takeouts are of prime importance, similar to what we asked in the poll question earlier as well. And last one, particularly focusing more on the source of innovation budget funding, right? Now, with increased verticalization in GBS organizations, one of the questions GBS leaders have been asking is around, should innovation be structured in a way which is the funding is more centralized at the GBS level, or having decentralized pockets at the BU or function specific level are more effective? Karthik, Rohit, any thoughts from you on these controversies?
Okay,
what have you been hearing?
Yeah, okay. So let me talk about maybe the second one, right? I believe that this is the time for enterprises to leverage GBS more than what they've been doing to drive innovation. Right? The reasons are, innovation can help drive new methods of cost takeout. Right? So we've seen many GBS organizations in the last 30 to 60 days, for example, develop new analytic solutions to help the parent company tide through this disruption. I think the point to consider here is this is not about just driving efficiency within the GBS, but this is also about leveraging the GBS to drive efficiencies across the enterprise. So that's really where I believe that enterprises should invest more in innovation to drive technology gains, to drive efficiency gains, and I see the GBS playing a substantial role in that.
And if I were to chime in on controversy one, Parul, I definitely see a stronger reason for enterprises to leverage GBS, and definitely a right time for GBS to act very proactively and then kind of quickly, find ways to help the enterprise. Reason being threefold, uh, and then these are not net new reasons, but again, very important reflection of the current situation. Uh, One is the cost pressures that will drive organizations to innovate even at lower cost. The need for innovation is not going away, but the cost pressure is much more significant. Second, again, different parts of the organizations are getting impacted in different ways because of this crisis. And GBS have a unique opportunity, and they can view organizations, uh, uh, as a small microcosm, and they can look around. They understand different parts, so they have a unique advantage to do this. And third is, of course, the talent advantage. Having access to talent collectively under one roof, or in a virtual model, but where they have both technology and operations capabilities. So all of that will strengthen the case to leverage GBS for this.
Okay, that's interesting. So now just to we moving to the last few minutes, last section of our webinar. So, what is the call to action for GBS organizations? The first is just building on what Rohit just said. Act proactively and act fast to help enterprises drift the curve. So, what do we mean by drift the curve, right? So, using a race car analogy, um, race car drivers use a sharp turn to actually zoom past and accelerate velocity, while most common drivers would brake, right? That's what we mean by saying drift the curve. And this is a great opportunity for GBS organizations to move quickly to help their enterprises with their innovation agenda. The second is, in the current environment, prioritizing innovation initiatives that can drive both rapid and radical cost takeout, right? That those are likely to resonate better, and yield substantial results. Just keep in mind, this is not new. The GBS organizations have been doing it for a while, but any innovation around, for example, dramatically increasing productivity, right? Those are things that are likely to fit very clearly with the enterprise's priorities at this stage. The third is, as we spoke about earlier, leverage the power of the external ecosystem. So the GBS can obviously have ownership, but doesn't mean that they need to do all parts of the innovation themselves. There is a huge ecosystem out there, be it in terms of third-party service providers, in terms of startups, right, in terms of universities. So thinking beyond the you've got to do everything myself. Now, while it is important to be proactive, right, the intent here is to drive this in collaboration with the enterprise. It is very, very important to work with business stakeholders to first identify the clear business need that innovation is going to solve. So just going back to what I said at the starting of the webinar, it's not innovation for innovation's sake, but tie it very clearly to a business case. That's going to be important to have this joint problem solving mindset. And last but not the least, building the right talent and culture. Right? The reason we're talking about culture is a lot of this is about how do you create the right entrepreneurial mindset within GBS organizations, and this is not easy, right? With many organizations, enterprises themselves that are not known for a culture of innovation, for a GBS to drive a entrepreneurial mindset is not easy. Here we're also talking about it's okay to fail, but fail fast. Creating that right kind of cultural environment, the right mechanisms in place to support the talent pool, accelerate innovation. I think if we get the talent model and the culture right, uh, you know, most other things will typically kind of fall in place. Okay. With that, let me move on to a few questions that have been asked. I know there have been a number of questions. We'll try and address as much as possible during the webinar. Alternatively, we will look to address them after the webinar. Okay, Parul, let me start with a question for you. We talked about measuring impact of innovation, but how do you really quantify the value of innovation? Any thoughts you have on this? I know this is not a science but an art. and there is no perfect answer, but in your experience and work you've done, what are some good practices to quantify value of innovation?
That's a tricky one, Karthik. In fact, there are multiple challenges for those organizations who've kind of tried to quantify this impact. So things as simple as not tracking enough metrics, or lack of an entity-wide view, or challenges in attribution of the impact once quantified. But the way we are seeing some organizations, few innovation organizations, kind of quantifying is dividing them into focus areas. So maybe the cost impact, risk impact, revenue impact, then looking at each of those instances and essentially saying, okay, if one particular instance, say, resulted in X percentage increase in lead volume, the sales volume, how much of those got converted, so on and so forth, that kind of gets converted to a revenue attribution number. For the cost impact, large scale cost optimization initiatives like RPA have kind of pushed the needle when it comes to impact, particularly from innovation. So multiple kind of multi-pronged approaches that we're seeing across the industry, but it benchmarking or kind of quantifying the innovation impact is one of the trickiest things that we're seeing in the market.
Okay. So let me then take a couple of questions that have come from the audience, additional questions. Will the future bring in functions like marketing and sales as part of GBS? Now, this is not really linked to the innovation topic, but the only response I'd say is, this is not future, it's already happening in many organizations. Many GBS organizations are doing sales enablement functions, right? Be it around, pricing, sales supports, on marketing, multiple things around, designing marketing campaigns, executing marketing campaigns, supporting with digital, social media analytics. So it's not a future question. I think it's already happening. Will it happen more? I guess it depends on the maturity of the specific, GBS organizations, and it is definitely an area of possibility. One other question, Rohit, I'm going to ask you this. Obviously, innovation is a broad subject. Fully agree with whoever asked this question. We talked about different types of innovation. We talked about how enterprises may bolster some of the innovation initiatives to bring down costs. How do we see this impacting automation initiatives? That's the question. Rohit, any perspective you have on that?
Yeah, and interestingly, what has happened is that if you roll back the clock a few months back or last year, we were seeing a bit of a slowdown in the or a bit of a people were losing faith in the extent of benefits of automation, and people were saying we don't know how much can happen, how fast. It was still one of the biggest efficiency levers in the market, mostly for GBS as well. But at the same time, a slight slowdown in the degree of adoption or focus. But in the recent past, in last few months, we are seeing significant focus getting back, and companies thinking, would the disruption have been much lesser if they had automated more? So both on the standard automation tools like RPA and intelligent automation, organizations are thinking about accelerating the adoption, and we are already see that as one of the priority areas for GBS to help out.
Yeah, and just to build on that, right? So when we say innovation due to automation, we're not just talking about RPA, but more the intelligent automation journey. Now, this is not new; it's been happening for a while. But I think the recessionary environment will actually provide a greater boost to this. And as I said earlier, it is an opportunity for both enterprises and GBS organizations to move forward with pace on this. Okay. There's another question which I'll look to address. The question is, will there be a shift from more offshore to nearshore centers coming up, or the vice versa happening post-COVID? I think this is again an interesting question. Let's look at it in two parts, right? One, if you were to talk about the broader work itself, and secondly, specific in the context of innovation. As most companies have always looked to leverage a balance of offshore, nearshore, and what we call as onshore. Right? Onshore meaning close to the business, nearshore is let's say, in the same time zone or a similar time zone, but at a, kind of a, lower cost, what you may also call as regional centers. And then you've got the offshore delivery centers that are, scaled, multifunctional capabilities. So companies always had that mix, right? And we expect companies to reevaluate what that right mix should be, right? Maybe for certain types of work, there will be a rebalancing towards, greater offshore, and there could be for certain types of work, depending on concentration risk, etc., a rebalancing towards, greater nearshore. So there isn't, one uniform answer to that. I think it will continue to be a global portfolio. But I think one thing which organizations will be more intentional about is how do they really structure a portfolio. So this is not about just having, okay, I've got one center here, one center in nearshore, two centers in offshore. It's really about how you run that as a portfolio. So actively think about what work should be placed where, how do you drive resiliency. So I think it's more the strategic workforce planning is what we think will change, not necessarily, work en masse moving from offshore to nearshore or vice versa. Okay. Let me maybe look to address, one more question before we kind of look to wrap up this presentation. Parul, maybe, if you can talk about this, right? So um, how do we see, low maturity GBS organizations after COVID? Will they continue to operate, or is it a possibility that they may be hived off to service providers?
Particularly interesting and a bit of a controversial question, Kartik, here, but uh, in these certain times, right, what we're seeing, some of the GBSs, especially the smaller ones, they're focusing more on kind of teeing up their efforts on optimization, efficiency side, so as to kind of deliver maximum value with the kitty they have, with the portfolio that they deliver currently. Uh, Overall, on the entire front, their initiatives on and identifying areas, pockets of excellence where they can upshift the value, kind of bring more meat to the table, accelerate some of the initiatives. We're seeing more efforts going towards those sides. Uh, Over and all, a lot of discussion around how can I step up, how can I upshift the value that I'm delivering, how can I accelerate the curve. That's I think what is going on as a top priority in most of the GBS most of the GBS leadership.
Yeah, I would just add on and say, look, in times like these, right, the tolerance or the willingness to continue to invest in something that is, either underperforming or not being able to deliver, value as per expectations, will be lesser than in normal times. So I think it is, for those low maturity GPS organizations, it will be important for them to, step up and demonstrate value quickly, because we are seeing enterprises, put everything on the table and at least rethink what the right services model should be. Right? Should it be GBS? Should it be, what should be the right balance, right, in terms of GBS versus service providers? So I think, as I said earlier, this is a great opportunity for GBS organizations, because there is a clear short-term, I'd say, time window for them to demonstrate upshift in value. Okay, we're kind of down to the last 5 minutes. Parul, do you want to just wrap up, and the rest of the questions we will look to address them separately.
Sure. So we do encourage all the attendees to take a moment and visit our COVID-19 Resource Center on everestgrp.com/COVID-19, or you can navigate via our homepage of the website. We have lots of information based on our interviews with enterprises, GBS organizations, service providers. I think we've been having conversations almost daily. We have reports, executive POV, podcasts, briefings, blogs, and then many other resources to help you on the journey. We'll be following up with all those of you who have expressed interest in taking up the offer and filling up the survey. A big thanks to all of you who've joined us today. And with that, I'll hand it over to Clara.
Thank you to Karthik, Parul, and Rohit, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, you will receive a follow-up email within 1 to 2 business days with a link to download the presentation slides, along with accessing the on-demand playback of today's live session.
Yeah.
On behalf of Everest Group and our panelists, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.